Okay, so today we're looking at Pirkei Avos, Ethics of Our Fathers, and this week, this Shabbos, we'll be studying chapter 2 on the second cycle of the study of Pirkei Avos. The first being from Pesach to Shavuos, and now we're on the second round. So we'll do a similar thing to what we did last week. Was look at one Mishnah and then see a number of different understandings of the same Mishnah. The Mishnah reads, in the Hebrew, have a zihirun barashos. I'm saying the Hebrew because it's important. Literally translated as be wary of, and this is the word we're going to focus on, is rashos, which means authority. So be wary of authority or power. For they befriend a person only for their own benefit. They seem to be friends or people that you love. When it suits them, when they have something to gain. And they don't stand by a person when he is in need. So the question is, what does the word rashos mean? Be wary of power or authority. They only are nice to you when they need you, and then when they don't need you, they don't care for you. So we have two different ways of reading the word rashos, which means power or authority. And we're going to see different ways of understanding based on these two different translations.
How do you spell it?
Reish, Shin, Vav, Saf. It's rashos or rishos. So again, the translation literally is the word authority.
Permission, no?
Permission, yeah, those who have the power to give permission. And that's why it's the word authority, because the one who has the ability to give permission. So that's right. The root word actually is permission, but it means here authority. So two ways of understanding what authority is. One way of understanding authority is it means political leadership. So if that's the translation, and the basic meaning of the Mishnah is be careful of those in political power, because they're only nice to you when they need you. So when they don't need you, they're not so nice to you anymore. When political expediency, they're nice to their voter base, and then when they're in power and it suits their political gain, something else. So be wary of your relationships with the political ruling class and put your suspicions and guardrails up, because you never know when they're not going to need you anymore and not care for you. That's one translation, and we're going to go through a number of understandings within that translation. That rashos means authority as in political leadership. Thanks for joining us. And the second translation is rashos, authority as in an internal struggle. Be careful of the internal authority, referring to, as we'll see, the evil inclination. As in God gives a certain authority to our evil inclination, and the Mishnah is telling us be careful with what it has to offer. So those are the two translations to this Mishnah, literally the translations. Are we talking about be wary of authority, political authority, or be wary of authority internally, that there's an authority I have within that controls me in doing things? Be careful of that. And then we're going to look at the Mishnah in these two translations. First, the political, then the internal, and we'll see them each on different ways of interpreting. Okay. Right, so the basic level that we're talking about political authority, it's quite simple. People in political power are out for political power, and they're nice to you when they need you to vote, and when they need you to donate, and when they don't need you, they're not so nice to you anymore. It's pretty simple, so therefore be careful. So why would the Mishnah be telling you that? Well, a number of different ways of understanding that. One is because earlier the Mishnah actually encouraged leadership, Jewish leadership, to befriend the local political authority for the benefit of the Jewish community. It's an important part of Jewish community activism, to be on good terms with the local governments so that Jews can live a happy and good life. I'm debating to say this, but it's interesting to know. My father just shared this with me. There was a good article in the Times of Israel defending Chabad in Russia against some of the other more inflammatory articles about Chabad in Russia being, quote, cozying up to the Russian government, and they're being, complicit, or what's the word they use nowadays? To say that you're like working with them, collaborating. And the article is basically making the historical point that throughout history, Jews have lived in countries that were not nice, period.
Mhm.
And no one expected Jewish leadership to start standing up to the not nice behavior of the local government, because then the wrath would just come down on them. Like, be practical. Like, do we think that the chief rabbi of Iran should start protesting the Khomeini? No one's going to think that,
And on the
because
contrary, they all
obviously,
joined in with everyone.
you
and
have to.
killed us.
That's right, because your job as Jewish leadership is to make sure that the local population is safe from the local government. So if you need to be nice to them, be nice to them, even if they're not nice people. That's just the way of the world throughout history. It's only today, thank God, we live in Western societies where it's free and the idea of protesting your government is totally normal, that we run around with like the moral high ground and say, why aren't you protesting your government? But for most of the world and for most of history, protest government meant jail at a minimum or off with your head at the higher end. That's what most of history meant, and most of the world today outside of the little corner we call the West. So the Mishnah therefore encourages, get close to the government, get to know them so you can advocate, lobby in modern terms on behalf of the Jewish people, right? And therefore the Mishnah comes and says, be careful when you do that. You have to be engaged, but be careful. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Don't think that they really like you when they behave like they like you. They just happen to need you, right? In history, this was a thing, especially in France, in old France, where Jews, the truth is until emancipation, this was the case in France and Poland, even farther back in Babylonia, where Jews were like a state within a state. So you had, let's just say France, because we're talking about that. So the French government didn't tax every individual Jew. They didn't even know who they were. They'd go to the Jewish authority and say, okay, you guys can do whatever you want. Let's live in these locations and give us X amount every month. And whatever you do inside of that location, we don't care. So police your own people, impose your own tax rules, impose your own laws, we don't care. And the Jewish courts actually had full authority on the Jewish community. And they would tax their people according to what the government needed to have to pay off to the local authorities and to pay for their own internal systems. The modern federation is really built on that model, where you had like a CEO, like the chief, sorry? You mean who?
There's authorities that they asking people to pay.
Yeah, taxes. Taxes, but they didn't tax each individual, they just taxed the community. So the Jewish people, you have to produce X amount. And then how you do it, go figure it out. So the Jewish system would create their own authority with their rabbinate, with the political leadership, and they had a whole hierarchy of boards. These guys are in charge of the burial society. These guys are in charge of the visiting the sick, and these guys are in charge of education. And they had a whole system to an internal structure. So what would happen especially in France, but in other places also, where Christians, at least then, didn't lend money for interest. I don't know if that's still a thing today, but they didn't then lend or borrow for interest, or lend for interest. So the only way to like really borrow money was from the Jews. Shylock, you know the story of Shylock? This is where the stereotype comes from, because Jews may lend to non-Jews for interest. So the Jews would become the lenders and the bankers. So let's say the French nobleman would need X amount of money to pay for X invasion of X country. They go to the Jews, and the Jews would charge a certain interest. That was the business arrangement. And then at some point, the debt gets high enough, and the authorities say, well, it's cheaper to kick them out than to pay them back. So out the Jews go of France. And then a little while later, they realize they need money too. Well, let's invite the Jews back in. Literally, this is what happened. Bring the Jews back in, borrow money, owe too much, kick them out, borrow them back in. That's literally what happened to Jews all over Europe until they were invited to go eastward to Poland. So I'm talking about like this is
The Inquisition around then, or even
so it's parallel, because Inquisition is in Spain. I'm talking France. So it's 1100s, 1200s, 1500s, until eventually they were invited by the King of Poland, where they're supposed to be more free, and then eventually became less free there too. But that's how the Jews ended up like Eastern Europe.
they had the sparks to redeem there.
Yeah, we had to be all over the world apparently. So anyway, I'm just making this point that this was the way of Jewish life, and that's what the Mishnah is telling you. You have to deal with the local government. You have to be involved so you can lobby on behalf of the community. But at the same time, be careful. Just because they're being nice to you now, it doesn't mean they're actually like you. And as soon as they don't need you, you're out. They don't care. That's the basic meaning of the Mishnah. Be wary of those in power. The Abarbanel adds another layer, which it's quite interesting that someone like the Abarbanel would say this, because the Abarbanel himself So you're talking about the Spanish Inquisition. So the Barbanel himself was originally in Spain, then kicked out of Spain, then to Portugal, then kicked out of Portugal, and then wandered sorry?
Morocco.
No, he was like, many Jews went from Spain to Morocco, but the Barbanel went the other direction, like towards Italy. Like he stayed on the northern part of the Mediterranean, like on the top crescent. Right? He ended up in Italy, if I'm not mistaken. Many Jews went there, but I don't think Barbanel did. Barbanel?
No, he wasn't.
He wasn't in Morocco. No, he went through Europe. He went to Italy. Anyway, so the Barbanel, before he was thrown out of Spain, and then before he was thrown out of Portugal, was extremely close with the king until he tried to negotiate and failed, and was thrown out of Spain into Portugal. For some time, was successful in the working with the Portuguese government to keep the Jews safe there, until there was too much pressure from the King of Spain on the King of Portugal to keep them out. I can't remember what the details were. Don't remember, but that's the overarching story. So a Barbanel, who's a man who actually experienced this whole idea of being close to the government and then being thrown out by them when it didn't work for them, he says that when it says be wary of those in power, it means be wary to remain honest. Because if you end up in that position, and you can very quickly start to learn their schemes and become scheming the same way they are. So the second half of the Mishnah, which says they're nice to you when they need you, and then they'll throw you out when they don't need you, that will be literally. Then the first half, which says be wary, is an independent statement. Like you read the two statements as separate, not like one long run-on sentence. Like the first reading we just said was be wary of power, because they are nice to you when they like you, when they need you, and then they're not nice when they don't need you. He reads them as two separate statements. Be wary of power, because when you get into power, you can become just as corrupted. So be careful, statement one. And statement two is, they're nice to you when they need you, and when they don't need you, they toss you out. So it's interesting to hear from a Barbanel who himself experienced this, had this kind of reading, maintaining his moral high ground, even as he is treated horrendously by the government who was supposedly nice to him. Just incidentally, because he was traveling and thrown out of Spain and he no longer had kings to butter up, he decided it's time to write books while he's running around Europe. Just to give you an idea of the kind of person we're talking about. Sorry. His name was Don, what was it? Some people pronounce it Abravanel or Abarbanel. And
he was a commentator on
he writes commentary on the Haggadah, on the Chumash, on Mishnah. He's a writer, a Torah scholar, a thinker, a politician. Yeah, that's right, Yitzchak, that's right. Don Yitzchak Abravanel, sorry. Yeah. He was like, I guess, the leading Jewish authority at the time. That's right. That's right. But Barbanel probably had better connections to the local authorities, at least while it lasted, than Rashi did.
When we start to comment, he said, "Oh, you are Barbanel."
Yeah, so the Barbanel is a really like a good model of like the Spanish Golden Era thinking, where he's a Torah scholar, a poet, a politician, wealthy, that whole, until he's thrown out of Spain.
Like the Rabbi.
If it's similar kind of sense, also poet, Jewish thinking, kicked out of Spain, very similar kind of thing. So the Rambam had connections in the government in Egypt. He was thrown out of Spain at a much younger age.
I'm just saying, same kind of.
Yeah, same genre of writing. Yes, that. So Rambam, even Ramban to some degree, Abarbanel, later Nissim, Rashba, Ritva, that genre of writers, the Spanish Golden Era writers, basically. Okay. So that is as far as the reading that we're translating the word Roshas as authority, as in be careful with the local authority. Now let's go to the other translation of authority, as in those that have control in our life internally, our Yetzer Hara. Actually, before we go there, I want to make another comment. This is a personal reading, and perhaps there's actually two different statements in the Mishnah. One which says, Al tizvad el harashos, don't get cozied up with the authority. Another one that says, which is this one, which is be wary of authority. And they use you when they need you, and then they throw you out. So a way to think of this in modern terms is in today's split political climate, what ends up happening is that if you have a certain view, say, and then that view aligns with a certain particular party, very often the person who has that view associated with this political party all of a sudden likes everything about that party. Why? I agree with them here and disagree with them here. But in our polarized political climate, where everybody's pressured, so to speak, to choose a political side, it becomes like very almost ingrained in our identity. What am I? I am a fill in the blank. When in reality, that's not who we are as Jews. That's not who we are. We're Torah people. And sometimes Torah aligns with this political thing, and in this regard, it might align with that political thing, and sometimes it might align with that political thing. Be careful as Jews not to wrap up our identity in political identity. It's not who we are. Of course, we're actors in the world of politics because we live in a society, we live in a polity, and we have to be worried about the local politics, and we have to figure out what's best for the Jewish community and so on and so forth. But don't wrap up your identity in the politics. It's not who we are as Jews, which actually leads to one of the other translations, which I skipped, from the Al-Sheikh, also an ex-Spaniard who lived in Tzfat. He writes that the Mishnah stating to be wary of authority is because if you trust authority too much, it will make you forget that God is really in charge. So it's true, you need the local politics and you have to be involved and you have to vote and you have to lobby on behalf of Jewish people, but be careful that you don't place your trust in political authority. Our trust is in Hashem. And taking that and extrapolating it to our day, our identity is related to Torah and God. We have to act in a political world, that's true, but don't get your identity wrapped up in that. That's not who we are. We're Jews, and that's it. I'll say even furthermore. There's a story, the previous Rebbe was once traveling. The Rebbe quotes the story in a essay that the Rebbe wrote on Chassidus, on what Chassidus is, describing what Chassidus is. In the beginning of that essay, he tells the following story. The previous Rebbe was once traveling, and in a hotel, he met up with a bunch of other rabbis. And the rabbis are all discussing which political philosophy is most linked to Torah, to Torah's thinking. And this is in Europe back when all the isms were very popular, all kinds of revolutions. And everybody, is capitalist good? Is this good? Is socialist good? Is the communist good? Is this good? All these different types of isms were being hotly debated. So each of these rabbis presented their case for why their political view is true to Torah. And this one cited to that law, and this one cited to that law, different laws and mitzvahs in Torah that indicate how a political structure should be built. And the whole time the previous Rebbe is not saying a word. And they asked him, what's your opinion? So he said, you guys are all right and you guys are all wrong. He says, Torah is God's wisdom. And as God's wisdom, it has the absolute truth of wisdom. Now, all political ideas are all human logic. And human logic will have some good and some not good. And therefore, the parts of your political system that you are finding as good and matching in Torah is that one good element that they've extracted from Torah for their system. So you're all pointing to, I don't know, this must be good because, canceling debt might be good because once every 7 years in Shemitah, that is canceled. It's a law in the Torah. Or, I don't know, some other political philosophy about giving to the poor because of the system of giving to the poor in Judaism, or you can literally find for everything. And the previous Rebbe was telling them what you're citing to Torah as a proof to your philosophy doesn't make your entire philosophy correct. It just means that one little element is the good part, considering that everything in the world has some good, which you would find in Torah. Right? So all to say that first of all, there is no system that has absolutely nothing to say. Every system in thinking has something to contribute. And you just have to know how to find where it is in Torah and match it up. But much more importantly, what it teaches us is that don't get your identities caught up in these political ideologies. Even if it so happens to be that in this regard, it aligns with Torah. Good, so it aligns with Torah, very nice. Identity comes from Torah, not from the political philosophy, even if in this regard it happens to align. So I think there's another way of understanding this Mishnah. Be wary of those in power, be wary of politicians, borrowing from the Al-Sheikh, who says, be wary of politics that you lose trust in God, and replacing that with a trust in government, you, instead of using the word trust, take the word identity. Be wary of your engagement in political life, lest you replace your identity as a Torah Jew into a political commentator, person, thinker, or whatnot, especially in our climate where everybody's forced to like have an opinion on every topic. I mean, you could just say you don't know, it's fine. But everybody has to have an opinion on every topic, and they all have to align with a specific party and a specific, like, why? I don't know. I have an opinion here, and here I don't have an opinion. Finished. Does it align with the party? Yes, maybe, no. But we get pushed to like, our identities have to be linked to some politics. It doesn't? Anyway.
Rabbi New,
Yes.
I'm just thinking that sometimes doing this, we, God forbid, make ourselves like gods and form our own parties and forget that that Hashem is our leader. And like it says, seeming to be friends, such time as it is to their own advantage, they stand not with a man in their hour of his need. And truly, Hashem is always with us in our hour of need. And whether we're feeling it or not, that is the basic.
Yep, that's the main.
To me, that is something that we have to always remember, even if there's suffering, even if there's pain, the thing that we have to hold on to. And not every political party, not every leader, not every philosophy, not every is going to be with us in our hour of need. Hashem will be there. And that's something me particularly, I'm sure, something we have to hold on to, even if others are telling us, don't be with that group, don't be with that leader, don't be with that, we have to feel the trust, bitachon of our leader, who is the true leader. And then the Emunah.
That's the main point. Yep. No, it's best. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So from there, we get to the second translation of the word rashos, which means the internal authority, and that which has authority in our lives. So translation number 1 from the Midrash Shmuel, which actually takes the word rashos quite literally, like you were saying, as in permission, reshut, permission. And he says, therefore, it's a reference to that which is permissible, meaning there are certain things Torah says are forbidden. Okay, you can't do those. Certain things Torah says you're required to do. Okay, you have to do those. And then there are things that are permissible. Does Torah say I have to drink the water now? No, it's permissible. So it says the Mishnah, be wary of that which is permissible. Make sure you're engaging it in the proper way, because the indulgences the world has to offer, even if they are permissible, are only there and good temporarily, so long as it provides a benefit. And then once the benefit's gone, so is that indulgence gone. And so like it's not sustained and lasting. So be wary of your engagement in that which is permissible, considering that it doesn't stand by you when you need it. Your commitment to Torah will stand by you when you need it, like you're just expressing. But your commitment to things that are not forbidden, the pursuit of whatever else it is that's permissible in this world, is only a temporary enjoyment and doesn't stand by you when you need it. So that's reading number 1, which I thought was interesting. Reading 2, this is rather interesting, another little historical tidbit. So this comes from the Ben Ish Chai, Rabbi Yosef Chaim, Moroccan thinker and Jewish scholar of not so long ago, a century ago, maybe, roughly. So he says like this, that Rashos, the authority, is the internal authority, the Yetzer Hara. God grants the permission, Reshut, to the Yetzer Hara, to our evil inclination, to have authority in our lives, to dictate its view. So he says like this, there are some times when the Yetzer Hara, when the evil inclination is very clear about being negative. So it's telling you to engage in X sin. Okay, so we all can identify sins. We know we're not supposed to. We can be given or we don't give in, but we know what it's about. Then there are times when the Yetzer Hara will package itself in a positive way, but its intention is to create destruction. He doesn't use the Yiddish expression, but there is a Yiddish expression, which is the Yetzer Hara Nazayden Azupitza, which means like the Yetzer Hara comes to you in a kapata, like dressed up as presenting itself as all holy, when in reality, deep down, the intention is negative. So he gives an example which seems to be a historical fact that happened in his time. It doesn't seem, doesn't say so, but it seems like it actually did happen. Right, to use an example, where is it? Okay, it doesn't, I'm not sure if it happened, but it seems from the way he describes it in quite detail that it actually might have happened. So there was a fellow who was very, very wealthy. And he decided that he's going to give all of his wealth to charity in his will. He wrote a will stating as such that all my wealth, charity, my children get nothing. And in his head, he was doing a good deed, all charity. And he said the end was, of course, the charities want to come to the court with a copy of the will to get all the money, and the children weren't going to let it happen without a fight. So before the charities came to collect, they made copies of this will, sent it to 3 or 4 different courts, asking them all to investigate and find a loophole as to why it was a mistaken will. And then it caused all kinds of fights between communities, between cities, between rabbis, between families, between different communal organizations. And all because this guy thought he was doing something holy, when in reality, he was just being foolish. And actually, the Gemara tells us elsewhere not to treat children differently, even if one is righteous and one is not, because you're just going to cause more problems in the world. So in his head, he was doing a Yetzer Tov, but it was packaged in a negative. It was a negative packaged in a positive. He thought he was doing this major favor by giving all of his wealth to charity, leaving nothing for his children. A big mistake, caused fights in the Jewish community. So he says this is hypothetical, but it seems from the details of how he's describing it that maybe it actually happened. So I don't know for sure. Maybe someone can do research and find out if such a story ever happened in the Ben Ish Chai's times. Unfortunately, it happens all the time. Right. Yeah.
Like a lot of cases, the kids between themselves they contest the will.
Sorry?
Especially they contest the will and goes to
Yeah.
court.
Yeah.
Especially if the guy is remarried and he
Yeah.
needs to
That's a specific scenario, but these things happen all the time. Yeah.
like real entanglement.
Yeah. Here, the government incentivizes us to write wills. It was a joke. I said the government incentivizes us to write wills because if you don't, they'll snap up most of it. So they incentivize us to write wills. But on that subject, actually, you should know that there's a special way to do a halachic will.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Well, it's very simple to do. And most of the Jewish, what do they call them? The notaries might probably know about it anyway. The reason for this is because by Jewish law, there is a Jewish law to how inheritance works, right? And one cannot override Jewish law. So I can write a will, and if it contradicts Jewish law, it becomes a problem, right? The firstborn getting double, and then all the other things that are involved in that. So the way to, sorry?
That's not fair.
That's right, but this is Torah. So the way to do it is,
It's a sign and it's there.
okay, I don't want to get into the discussion of how exactly the will works and why it works the way it does in Torah law. There's a lot to be said for that, and maybe we'll do it another time. But I do want to make the point that the way you deal with this is, and you make the will effective before death. And that way it's legally a gift and not a will. Legally, I mean halachically. It's halachically a gift, not a will, and therefore doesn't override Jewish law because I can give a gift to anybody I want, even if I can't inherit whoever I want. I can give a gift to whoever I want, and if you write it out as, there's a formulation to do it. The local validator can probably provide it for you very simply. No, it's just stated in the will.
It's just stated, as long as it's stated before, okay,
Yeah.
the gift doesn't have to be given before.
No, but it goes into effect
Yes,
moments
after-
before death, and that way
Yes.
it's maintained halachically also. It's something to know. Okay, so final translation on the word Roshos. Be wary of those who are in authority. This is the Rebbe's reading. And he says like this. The authority referred to here, we had earlier, like it talks about the Yetzer Hara, evil inclination, given authority, and be careful about it when he packages himself in a positive light, but really it's really deep down, it's negative. The Rebbe reads it as not authority in the negative, but actually positive. Our Yetzer Tov. Our Yetzer Tov. Also, sometimes you got to be wary. Why? How's that? So it comes down to this. Within our good Jewish experience, within our godly soul, within our godly self, within our good inclination, we have different tools. You have primarily two: the mind and the heart. You have seichel, you have your intelligence, you have your emotions. Right? Positive intelligence and positive emotions, these are all tools that we have to serve Hashem. And a person has to be wary to know when to use which tool. Right? And at times, you actually have to override all the tools. Sometimes what's required here is dedication. We have to get it done, march forward. Don't spend your time trying to rationalize it and argue this way and that way. Dedication and move forward. Sometimes that's what's required. Sometimes what's required is an intellectual analysis, and sometimes what's required is an emotional reaction or a feeling or an investment or something like that. And then sometimes, be careful, sometimes none of this. Time to dedicate all the way to the end. For example, Deborah gives an example of the Bet Yosef. Bet Yosef, another ex-Spaniard who lived in Spain, lived in Tzfat also, same time as the Al-Sheikh, or similar time at least. And so the Bet Yosef says, or Yosef Karo writes, he was supposed to be, someone who merited to give up his life for Hashem, to die al Kiddush Hashem. For whatever reason, that merit was taken away from him. And thanks to that, he was capable of writing the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law. And yet, it was still considered a punishment that he lost out on the merit to dedicate himself like that. Even though, like logically speaking, what could be better than the providing the Code of Jewish Law for all the generations? But he considered it as a personal punishment that he didn't merit to self-sacrifice. Because that's the point. Sometimes what's required is dedication, full stop. Overriding even spiritual intellectualism or spiritual pursuit of what I want and what I feel and what's amazing. Sometimes what's required is dedication, 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 what we call Mesirat Nefesh, full self-sacrifice. So here the Rebbe reads, be wary of an authority, be wary of your own internal positive authority, and know when to use it correctly. Because sometimes it's time to go into hyper-authority mode, override. Dedication, we move forward. It's hard, it's difficult, we're feeling, we're not feeling, we're understanding, we're not understanding, we're moving forward. So even the tools we have on the spiritual sense, be wary to know when to use what tools when.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
Quick comment. That reminds me so much of the whole story with Yaakov and Esav and what Rivka did. Like Rivka and Yaakov, they just sort of went full forward doing it, not analyzing, was it fair, was it not, did I trick, did I not? Like it just reminded me of that. They did what needed to be done. I don't know.
Sure. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, yeah.
Okay, so there we have quite a few layers on understanding one Mishnah. Hope you enjoyed that. Thank you for listening. It was kind of interesting. Sorry?
What, I want to write down what Eric and.
It's Perek Beis, so Mishnah, Perek Beis, Mishnah 3. Mishnah 3. Okay, have a wonderful day, everybody, and a wonderful week.
Thank you.